She slammed the briefcase onto his desk, rain dripping from her torn sleeves. Every guard in the room reached for their gun, but the Mafia boss didn't blink. He leaned forward and said, "No one finds me, so tell me, how did you?" Her answer would decide if she left the room alive. That moment when bravery looks like madness, if you're already invested in whether she survives this, subscribe now and share this story with someone who loves characters that choose danger over safety. The November rain lashed against the cracked windows of the bus terminal where Beverly Clark had taken shelter for the night. At 27, she'd learned to survive Chicago's streets the way others learn to breathe, instinctively, constantly, without thinking. 2 years on these unforgiving streets had honed her observation skills into something approaching a superpower. Every movement meant something. Every detail told a story. Her thin coat clung to her skin, the cold biting through the worn fabric. She was used to hunger and hardship, but not to the sight of a sleek leather briefcase glinting beneath the flickering streetlight across the road. 90 minutes earlier, chaos had erupted at Marcello's, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Gunfire had sent well-dressed patrons fleeing into the rain, their screams mixing with the wail of approaching sirens. Beverly had watched from her shelter as black car peeled away from the scene, tires screeching on wet pavement. In the aftermath, when the police arrived and witnesses scattered, she'd noticed it, abandoned beneath an overturned chair on the outdoor terrace. The briefcase was immaculate, too clean for this world, too expensive to be forgotten accidentally. She crossed the street in the rain and picked it up with trembling hands. The silver-engraved initials on the clasp made her freeze. A.B. Everyone in Chicago's underworld knew those letters. Alfredo Brookover, head of the Brookover family. The man whose name was whispered like a curse. The man whose photograph appeared in newspapers flanked by lawyers, always walking free from courtrooms where witnesses developed convenient memory loss. Beverly should have walked away. Opening it would be suicide. Keeping it would be worse. But something in her, the part that still believed in right and wrong, the part that hadn't been completely crushed by 2 years of sleeping in doorways and digging through dumpsters, couldn't ignore it. By dawn, she had one goal: return the briefcase to its owner, even if it meant facing the devil himself. Finding Alfredo Brookover wasn't simple. Men like him didn't advertise their locations. They were insulated by layers of security, hidden behind legitimate business fronts, protected by people paid to make problems disappear. But Beverly had something most people didn't: a network of invisible eyes. She spent the day calling in quiet favors. Homeless veterans who watched street corners nobody else noticed. Late shift delivery drivers who knew which back entrances opened at odd hours. Bodega clerks who recognized which black cars idled outside which buildings. Street vendors who knew which restaurants cleared their best tables for certain guests after midnight. She tracked patterns others missed: delivery schedules, security rotations, the way black SUVs with tinted windows appeared at the same downtown high-rise every night at 2 a.m., the way guards switched positions before private meetings, the building where lights stayed on in the executive floor long after legitimate business hours closed. By midnight, she had her answer: Brookover Holdings, the corporate tower downtown. Top floor, after-hours access only. By 2:45 a.m., she stood in the marble lobby, rainwater dripping from her threadbare coat onto polished floors that probably cost more to install than she'd earned in her entire previous life. The briefcase felt heavier now, not because of its contents, but because of what returning it meant. She was crossing a threshold, stepping into a world where one wrong word could mean her death. 2 security guards behind the reception desk looked up, their expensive suits barely concealing the tactical builds underneath. Their expressions shifted from bored to suspicious in an instant. Beverly's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to walk forward, her worn sneakers squeaking on the pristine floor. The broader guard stood, hand moving instinctively toward his concealed weapon. "This is private property. Building's closed." "I need to see Alfredo Brookover," Beverly said, her voice steadier than her shaking hands. She held up the briefcase. "I found something that belongs to him." The guards exchanged a glance. The tension in the room shifted. The second guard reached for his phone, eyes never leaving her face. "Don't move," Don't touch anything. Beverly stood perfectly still, clutching the briefcase, rain dripping onto marble as the guard murmured into his phone. She caught fragments. Young woman. Says she found the briefcase. A pause, then a response she couldn't hear. The guard's expression changed. He lowered the phone. Name? Beverly met his gaze directly. Beverly Clark, she said, lifting her chin. Tell him I found something that belongs to him. The guard spoke into the phone once more, then nodded slowly. Wait here. As he disappeared toward the elevators, Beverly realized there was no turning back now. Whatever happened next, her life had just changed forever. The only question was whether she'd survive it. 7 minutes felt like 7 hours. When the elevator doors finally opened, a man in his mid-40s emerged, silver threading through dark hair, sharp eyes that cataloged everything in seconds. Beverly recognized him from business journal photographs she'd studied at the library. Luca Ferran, Alfredo Brookover's consigliere. Come with me, he said simply, his voice carrying the kind of authority that didn't require volume. Beverly's legs felt unsteady as she stepped into the elevator. The doors closed with a soft chime, sealing her inside the polished metal box. As they ascended through floors of sleeping offices, Luca studied her in the mirrored walls. You have courage, he said quietly. Let's hope you also have sense. The elevator opened directly into a private corridor. Warm, recessed lighting. Marble floors that gleamed like black glass. The scent of expensive cigars and aged leather hung in the air. Luca led her to massive double doors, then pushed them open. The conference room beyond stole Beverly's breath. A crystal chandelier cast amber light across a space designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline, rain streaking down the glass like tears. The conference table, dark wood polished to a mirror finish, stretched nearly the length of the room. 5 men in tailored suits occupied strategic positions around the space, their eyes tracking her movement with predatory focus. But it was the man at the head of the table who commanded every molecule of oxygen in the room. Alfredo Brookover stood with his back to the windows, hands clasped behind him, perfectly still. Tall, easily 6'2", wearing a charcoal suit that fit like it had been engineered specifically for his frame. Dark hair styled with precision. A neatly trimmed beard that accentuated a jawline that could cut glass. Ink traced up his neck from beneath his collar. Some kind of script or symbol she couldn't quite make out. Psama. When his eyes locked onto hers, Beverly's breath caught. They were dark, intelligent, calculating, absolutely merciless. Sit. His voice was quiet, controlled, more dangerous for its lack of volume. Beverly crossed the room on trembling legs, hyper-aware of every eye tracking her movement. She set the briefcase on the table and lowered herself into the chair opposite him. Alfredo remained standing. He opened the briefcase with precise movements, his expression revealing nothing as he scanned the contents. Documents in leather folders, wax seals unbroken. Whatever he saw satisfied him. Everything was exactly as it should be. His gaze returned to her, and something shifted in his expression. Not softening. Men like him didn't soften. But curiosity replaced immediate threat. This case was at Marcello's during tonight's disagreement. Each word was chosen with surgical precision. Most people would have run from that scene. You stayed, found this, and then you hunted me down. He leaned forward slightly, palms flat on the table. No one finds me unless I want to be found. So tell me, how did you? Beverly met his gaze directly. Showing fear now would be fatal. I've lived on Chicago's streets for 2 years, she said, willing her voice steady. You learn to see patterns others miss. Delivery schedules, security rotations. Which buildings have lights on which floors at unusual hours? I asked the right questions to the right people. Silence stretched between them. One of the suited men shifted position. Alfredo's eyes never left her face. Street veterans, Beverly continued, because silence felt more dangerous than talking. Late shift drivers, bodega clerks, people no one notices. They see everything. Impressive intelligence network, Alfredo said slowly, for someone with no resources. He straightened, circling the table with measured steps. Beverly forced herself not to track his movement, to keep her eyes forward even as he moved into her peripheral vision. "What's your name?" "Beverly Clark." "Well, Beverly Clark." He spoke her name like he was testing how it tasted. "You've demonstrated remarkable honesty in returning property that could have been sold for considerable money. You've also demonstrated concerning knowledge about my movements and habits." He stopped directly beside her chair. Beverly's pulse hammered in her throat. That combination makes you either exceptionally valuable or dangerously problematic. Beverly swallowed hard. "I just wanted to return what wasn't mine. I don't want trouble." "Trouble found you the moment you touched that case." He moved back to his position at the head of the table, that penetrating gaze never wavering. "You've shown honesty and intelligence. Both can be fatal in my world." A long silence followed. Then Alfredo glanced at his consigliere. "Luca, ensure Ms. Clark is compensated for her honesty, and find her somewhere safe to stay tonight." His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. It was a command. Luca nodded. "Of course, Verkino." Beverly started to stand and relief flooding through her. She was going to walk out of this room alive. "Miss Clark," Alfredo's voice stopped her mid-rise. She met his eyes. "Return tomorrow, same time." The corner of his mouth curved, not quite a smile, something far more dangerous. "I'm not done with you yet." 3 hours later, Beverly stood in a hotel room that cost more per night than she used to make in a week. Clean towels, hot water, a bed with sheets that didn't smell like the street. Room service had brought food, real food, still warm, more than she could possibly eat. She showered until the water ran cold, watching 2 years of grime spiral down the drain. The complimentary robe felt like silk against her clean skin. When she finally collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow. For the first time in years, she felt almost human. But as she stared at the ceiling, one thought circled through her mind. "Return tomorrow. I'm not done with you yet." Most people in her position would disappear. Take whatever money Luca left for her and vanish into another city, another life. Put as much distance as possible between themselves and Alfredo Brookover. But Beverly had never been like most people. She'd walked into that building hoping for gratitude, maybe a reward, possibly a warning to forget what she'd seen. Instead, she'd been marked, claimed, drawn into an orbit she didn't fully understand by a man who saw something in her that even she hadn't recognized yet. What would you do? If the most dangerous man in the city looked at you not with threats, but with curiosity, would you run, or would you show up tomorrow to discover what he really wants? Sometimes the choices that terrify us are the ones that change everything. If this story is making you think about the decisions we make when we have nothing left to lose, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're wondering what happens when Beverly walks back through those doors tomorrow, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. The invisible chains were already tightening around her. The question wasn't whether she wanted to break them. The question was whether she'd ever really had a choice at all. Morning light flooded through floor-to-ceiling windows as Beverly stepped into Brookover Holdings' executive suite. If last night's conference room had been designed to intimidate, this office was built to seduce. Everything gleamed. Glass, chrome, polished marble. The kind of sterile corporate elegance that hid blood under balance sheets. Alfredo sat behind a massive desk, reviewing documents with the same focused intensity he'd used to study her the night before. He didn't look up immediately. A power move she recognized, making her wait, reminding her who controlled this space. "Sit," he said finally, gesturing to the chair across from him. Beverly lowered herself into leather that probably cost more than her entire former wardrobe. She'd showered again this morning, dressed in the clean clothes Luca had provided. Simple but new. She felt human. She also felt exposed. Alfredo set down his pen and leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Clark. Before the streets." It wasn't a request. Beverly's jaw tightened. "Does it matter?" "Everything matters." His eyes never left hers. "You found me using pattern recognition and intelligence gathering. Those aren't skills you learn sleeping in bus terminals. So tell me, who were you before you became invisible?" The question hit harder than she'd expected. Who were you? Past tense. Like that person was dead. Maybe she was. I worked as a data analyst, Beverly said quietly. Corporate risk assessment. I was good at it. Found patterns in financial reports, identified inconsistencies, flagged potential fraud. And? She exhaled slowly. And I found something I wasn't supposed to find. Executive embezzlement. Millions moving through shell companies. I reported it through proper channels. Her laugh was bitter. Proper channels that led directly to the people doing the stealing. Alfredo's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or respect. They fired you, he said. Not a question. Worse, they destroyed my credibility. Planted evidence that I was the one stealing. By the time I proved my innocence, my reputation was ruined. No one would hire me. Savings ran out. Rent came due. She met his gaze. You know how the fall goes. Fast at first, then all at once. Silence settled between them. Outside, Chicago moved at its relentless pace. Traffic, construction, commerce. In here, time felt suspended. You can read systems, Alfredo said finally. Patterns, financial structures, human behavior. He leaned forward. That's useful. Beverly's pulse quickened. She saw where this was going. I'm not looking for a job. Then think of it as survival. The words hung in the air like a blade. Alfredo stood, moving to the window. His silhouette against the skyline was almost casual, but Beverly knew better. Nothing this man did was casual. Chicago's underworld operates on information, he said, still facing the glass. Who's moving what? Which territories are unstable? What the streets are saying that my people can't hear? He turned. You have access to a world my organization can't reach. The invisible people, the ones everyone ignores. You want me to spy for you? I want you to survive, and I'm offering you the means to do it. He moved back to his desk, extracting a slim folder. Street-level intelligence. Whispers. Rival movements. Things that seem insignificant until you know how to read them. He slid the folder across the desk. Inside, Beverly saw photographs, locations, names she didn't recognize. This isn't optional, is it? She asked quietly. Alfredo's smile was almost gentle. Almost. Ms. Clark, you walked into my world the moment you picked up that briefcase. The question isn't whether you work for me. The question is whether you do it willingly or reluctantly. He sat back down. One path gives you autonomy and resources. The other, he left the sentence unfinished. Beverly stared at the folder. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to walk out, to disappear. But where would she go? Back to the streets? Back to being invisible? Vulnerable, one cold night away from pneumonia, or worse? And beneath the fear, something else stirred. The same thing that had driven her to expose corruption at her old job, even knowing the cost. Curiosity, the need to understand systems, to see the patterns everyone else missed. What exactly do you want me to do? She heard herself ask. Alfredo's expression shifted. Satisfaction, maybe, or recognition that she'd already decided. Listen, watch, report what you hear. Your network of street contacts, delivery drivers, vendors, they see things my people don't. You filter that information, bring me what matters. And if I refuse, you won't. He said it with absolute certainty. Because you're like me, Miss Clark. You need to know. You need to understand how things work, even when understanding is dangerous. He was right. God help her. He was right. Beverly reached for the folder, her fingers trembling slightly as they touched the leather binding. 1 month, she said. Then we renegotiate. Alfredo's smile was genuine this time. Predatory, but genuine. 1 month, he agreed. As Beverly stood to leave, folder clutched against her chest. She felt the weight of what she'd just accepted. She'd walked in here thinking she had a choice. Now she understood the truth. Her honesty hadn't earned her gratitude. It had earned her a debt. And Alfredo Brookover always collected what he was owed. The invisible chains weren't tightening anymore. They'd already locked into place. 3 weeks changed everything. Beverly's new apartment, modest but secure, paid for by Brookover Holdings, became her base of operations. Each morning she walked the streets with purpose now, collecting whispers like currency. Each evening she compiled reports, translating street gossip into actionable intelligence. And twice a week she reported directly to Alfredo. Their meetings had evolved. What started as brief debriefings stretched into longer conversations. He'd ask about patterns she noticed. She'd explain the logic behind her conclusions. Somewhere along the way, the discussion shifted from purely professional to something harder to define. Tonight, Beverly sat across from him in his private office, rain drumming against the windows. She'd just finished explaining how a sudden influx of out-of-state license plates near the docks suggested someone was moving product through contested territory. The Castellano family, Alfredo said, his voice thoughtful. They've been quiet lately. Too quiet. Quiet usually means planning, Beverly offered. He smiled, a real one, not the calculated expressions he wore for his soldiers. You're learning. I had a good teacher. The words hung between them, carrying weight neither acknowledged. Beverly had spent 3 weeks watching Alfredo operate. She'd seen him negotiate million-dollar deals with the same calm he used to order coffee, watched him diffuse tensions between volatile men with nothing but measured words and unwavering eye contact. He was merciless when necessary, but never wasteful, meticulous in his planning, charming when it served his purposes. But sometimes, late at night when he thought no one was watching, she saw something else, something haunted behind those dark eyes. You should go, Alfredo said, glancing at his watch. It's late. Beverly gathered her notes, but before she could stand, the office door opened. Luca entered, his expression grim. Behind him, 2 soldiers dragged a man Beverly didn't recognize, mid-30s, expensive suit now disheveled, face already showing signs of interrogation. We found your leak, Luca said quietly. Alfredo's entire demeanor shifted. The warmth vanished, replaced by something cold and absolute. He didn't look at Beverly, but she felt the dismissal in his silence. She should have left, should have walked out before whatever came next. But she didn't move. Alfredo stood, circling his desk with predatory grace. You've been talking to the Castellanos, he said to the man. Not a question, a statement. I didn't, I swear. Don't. Alfredo's voice was soft, terrifyingly soft. Luca has phone records, bank transfers. You sold information about my shipment schedules for $30,000. He stopped in front of the man. $30,000, that's what my trust was worth to you. The man was crying now. Please, I have a family. So did the driver who was killed when the Castellanos hijacked that shipment based on your information. Alfredo's expression never changed. His wife, 3 children. But you have a family, so that makes it different? Beverly's heart hammered. She should look away, should leave. But she couldn't. Alfredo drew a pistol from inside his jacket. Smooth, practiced, almost casual. The betrayer's eyes went wide. Wait, please. The shot was quiet, suppressed, professional. The man crumpled. Alfredo handed the weapon to Luca without a word, then returned to his desk as if nothing had happened. Clean this up. Make sure his family receives his pension. They did not betray me. He did. Yes, sir. The soldiers dragged the body out. Luca followed, closing the door behind them. Silence filled the office. Rain continued its relentless percussion against the glass. Beverly remained frozen in her chair, pulse racing, hands trembling. She'd just witnessed a murder. Cold, calculated, efficient, and she hadn't looked away. Alfredo poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, then glanced at her. You're still here. Beverly's voice came out hoarse. I didn't know if I should leave. You should have. He drank. Most people would have. I'm not most people. Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or recognition. He poured a second glass and slid it across the desk toward her. Beverly's hand shook as she reached for it. The whiskey burned going down, but it steadied her somehow. You kill to protect what's yours, she said quietly, the words coming before she could stop them. I survive by pretending I have nothing to lose. She met his eyes. We're not that different. Alfredo's gaze darkened. For a long moment, he just stared at her, and Beverly saw something dangerous stirring behind those calculating eyes, something that had nothing to do with business. "That's what scares me," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The air between them felt charged, electric, dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with violence. Beverly should have left then, should have put distance between herself and whatever this was becoming. Instead, she stayed. They talked for another hour, about nothing, about everything, about the strange parallel paths that had led them both to this moment, her falling from corporate grace, him rising through blood and strategy to command an empire. When Beverly finally left, well past midnight, she felt the weight of invisible eyes tracking her exit. From the shadows near the elevator, she caught a glimpse of Luca watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Suspicion, or maybe concern. Either way, she'd crossed another line tonight, and there was no going back. Beverly noticed the black sedan on Tuesday. Same car, same position across from her apartment building. Different driver, but the same watchful stillness that marked professionals. Wednesday, a man in a coffee shop stared too long for pretending to check his phone. Thursday, she spotted the sedan again, this time following 3 cars back as she took the train to meet one of her street contacts. By Friday, fear had crystallized into certainty. Someone was watching her. She varied her routes, changed her schedule, used every evasion technique she'd learned from 2 years on the streets. But the surveillance continued, subtle, professional, persistent. Saturday morning, she found a message slipped under her door. No envelope, just a folded piece of paper with 7 words written in block letters. "We know who you work for." Beverly's hands shook as she read it, then read it again. This wasn't Alfredo's security. This was someone else. Someone who knew exactly what she'd become. She burned the note in her sink and called the number Alfredo had given her for emergencies. He answered on the first ring. "What's wrong?" "I'm being followed," she said quietly, "and someone left me a message." Silence, then, "Stay exactly where you are. Don't open the door for anyone except Nate. He'll be there in 10 minutes. The line went dead. Alfredo's rage was a quiet, terrible thing. Beverly had never seen him lose control, not when executing the traitor, not during tense negotiations, not even when receiving bad news. His power came from absolute composure. But as he read the surveillance report Nate had compiled, something cold and lethal settled over his features. They were in a safe house now, a nondescript apartment in a building Alfredo owned under shell corporations. Guards at every entrance, bulletproof windows, secure communications. "Luca," Alfredo said finally, his voice like winter. It was Luca. Beverly's stomach dropped. "Your consigliere. My former consigliere." He set down the report with controlled precision. "He's been making inquiries, expressing concerns about your influence, questioning whether you're a security risk." His jaw tightened. I should have seen it sooner. Nate stood near the door, his expression grim. He leaked her identity to the Moretti family, confirmed it through one of our inside sources an hour ago. "Why?" Beverly whispered. "What did I do?" Alfredo's eyes met hers, and she saw something raw beneath the fury. "You didn't do anything. You are something. You're the variable Luca couldn't control. He thinks you're weakening my judgment, making me soft. Are you?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Soft?" His laugh was bitter. "If I were soft, Miss Clark, Luca would already be dead. Instead, I'm trying to decide whether killing my oldest advisor will start a war I'm not ready to fight." Beverly stood, crossing to the window. Chicago sprawled below, oblivious to the chess game being played in its shadows. "He sold me out because he thinks I'm a weakness." "You're not a weakness." Alfredo's voice came from directly behind her. She hadn't heard him move. "You're a complication. There's a difference." She turned. He was closer than she'd expected, close enough that she could see the exhaustion behind his carefully maintained control. "The Morettis know who I am now," she said. "They know I gather intelligence for you. That makes me a target." "Yes. And Luca, your own man, put a target on my back to protect the family's discipline." "Yes." Beverly's laugh was hollow, So I'm not safe from your enemies or your allies. Excellent. Alfredo's hand rose slowly, almost touching her face before he seemed to catch himself. His hand fell. I've moved you here. Doubled security. But you're right, the damage is done. People know now. So what happens to me? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. You've become a liability I can't eliminate, Alfredo said quietly, his dark eyes searching hers. Do you understand what that means? Beverly's breath caught. In his world, liabilities disappeared. Problems got solved permanently. But here he stood, close enough to kill her effortlessly, looking at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. It means I matter, she whispered. Something shifted in his expression. Acknowledgement maybe, or surrender to a truth he'd been fighting. Yes, he said simply. God help us both. It means you matter. His phone buzzed. He stepped back, the moment breaking like glass. Luca's requesting a meeting, he said, reading the message. He wants to explain. Will you hear him out? Alfredo's smile was cold. I'll hear him, then I'll decide whether he leaves that meeting alive. He glanced at Nate. Stay with her. No one enters this building without my explicit authorization. Understood. As Alfredo moved toward the door, Beverly called after him. What if he's right? What if I am making you weak? He paused, hand on the doorknob, not turning around. Then I'll deal with that weakness the same way I deal with everything else. Strategically, ruthlessly, and on my terms. Not his. He looked back over his shoulder. Get some rest, Ms. Clark. This isn't over. The door closed behind him. Beverly sank onto the couch, exhaustion and adrenaline warring inside her. Nate remained by the door, professional and silent. She'd become something she never intended. Not just an asset, but a complication that threatened the careful balance of Alfredo's empire. And the most dangerous part? She wasn't sure she wanted to go back to being invisible anymore. Even if visibility meant becoming a target. Even if mattering meant becoming the very thing that could destroy them both. The call came at 3 a.m. Beverly woke to shouting in the hallway. Nate's voice, sharp and urgent. Then Alfredo's responding in tones she'd never heard before. Raw, furious, barely controlled. She pulled on clothes and emerged to find Alfredo standing in the safe house living room, phone clutched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. His other hand gripped the back of a chair hard enough that the wood creaked. Say that again, he said into the phone, his voice dangerously quiet. Beverly caught Nate's eye. The lieutenant shook his head slightly. Not good. Alfredo listened for another moment, then ended the call with deliberate precision. When he looked up, his eyes held murder. They have Tommy, he said flatly. The Morettis grabbed him outside his apartment 2 hours ago. Tommy, Alfredo's lieutenant, the quiet, efficient man who'd been present during her first meeting in the conference room. Is he, Beverly started, alive for now? Alfredo's jaw clenched. They're offering a trade. The room went silent. They want me, Beverly said. Not a question. Yes. Alfredo moved to the window, staring out at the pre-dawn darkness. They think you're my weakness. They think trading you for Tommy proves I value some homeless girl over my own lieutenant. His reflection in the glass looked carved from stone. They're wrong. What are you going to do? He turned and Beverly saw calculation replacing rage. I'm going to burn their operation to the ground. Every warehouse, every front business, every safe house. By sunrise, the Moretti family will understand what it costs to touch what's mine. That starts a war, Nate said quietly. Let it. Alfredo's voice was absolute. I'm done playing defensive. Beverly's mind raced, seeing the pattern he couldn't or wouldn't see. Damn, they want you to retaliate. That's the point. I know the point. No, you don't. She stepped forward. They grabbed Tommy. You respond with overwhelming force. That gives them justification to escalate. Suddenly, it's not them attacking you, it's mutual warfare. The other families stay neutral. The police increase pressure on everyone. She met his eyes. They're not trying to win. They're trying to make you lose control. Alfredo stared at her, fury and recognition warring across his features. So what do you suggest? His tone made it clear he expected no good answer. Beverly took a breath. Let me go to them. Absolutely not. They think I'm scared. Helpless. That's your advantage. Her words came faster now, the strategy crystallizing. They think I'm just some girl you're protecting. They won't expect me to be willing. They won't expect it a trap. Because it's not a trap, it's suicide, Alfredo said flatly. The moment they have you, they kill Tommy anyway and use you for leverage. Or worse. Not if you're already there. Silence filled the room. Nate straightened. She's right. If we know the exchange location, we can position teams before she arrives. They'll be focused on her, not perimeter security. No, Alfredo's voice was final. I won't use her as bait. You already are, Beverly said quietly. The moment Luca leaked my identity, I became bait. The only question is whether I'm bait you control or bait that controls you. Their eyes locked. Beverly saw the war raging behind his carefully maintained facade, strategic logic versus something far more dangerous. Please, she said, and hated how her voice cracked. Let me do this. Tommy's life is worth it. Your empire's stability is worth it. I'm worth it, she didn't say. But the words hung in the air anyway. Alfredo's expression was agony. If something happens to you, then you burn them all, Beverly finished. But it won't, because you'll be there. The silence stretched for an eternity. Finally, Alfredo turned to Nate. Sniper teams, 3 positions minimum. Full communications blackout until she's inside. No one moves until I give the signal. Yes, sir. And get me a tracker. He looked at Beverly. Something small enough they won't find it immediately. Nate disappeared into the bedroom to make calls. Alfredo crossed the room until he stood directly in front of Beverly, close enough that she could see the exhaustion and fear beneath his rage. This is the most reckless thing I've ever agreed to, he said quietly. Then we're even. I walked into your building with nothing but a briefcase and hope. His hand rose, hesitating near her face before finally touching her cheek. The first time he'd allowed himself that intimacy. His thumb traced her jawline with devastating gentleness. If they hurt you, he whispered, there won't be enough of Chicago left to hold their funerals. Beverly leaned into his touch, just slightly. Then make sure they don't. For one suspended moment, everything else fell away. The strategy, the danger, the empire and the warfare, and the careful distance they'd maintained. In that moment, there was only the truth. Come back to me, Alfredo said, and it wasn't a command. It was a plea. I will, Beverly promised, knowing she might be lying, knowing he knew it too. His forehead touched hers briefly, a confession without words, a surrender neither could afford but both desperately needed. Then he stepped back, and the walls rebuilt themselves. Nate will brief you on the tracker and communications protocol, he said, his voice once again controlled. Professional. The exchange is set for dawn. We have 3 hours to prepare. Beverly nodded, not trusting her voice. As she turned toward the bedroom to change into appropriate clothes, she felt his eyes following her. She was walking into a trap designed to kill her. But for the first time in years, she wasn't walking alone. Dawn broke gray and cold over the abandoned dockside warehouse. Beverly stood in the back of the black SUV, Nate making final adjustments to the tracker embedded in the lining of her jacket. It was smaller than a dime, nearly impossible to detect without a thorough search. Alfredo's team is already in position, Nate said quietly, rooftop across the street. 2 sniper nests. He'll be inside the adjacent building with Strike Team Alpha. Beverly nodded, trying to slow her racing heart. You don't have to do this, Nate added, meeting her eyes. Say the word, and we extract Tommy another way. There is no other way, not one that doesn't cost more lives. She took a steadying breath. I'm ready. Nate's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, he's terrified right now. I've worked for Alfredo for 8 years, never seen him like this. Before Beverly could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Come alone. East entrance. You have 5 minutes. That's my cue, Beverly said. She stepped out of the SUV into the cold morning air. The warehouse loomed ahead, broken windows, rusted metal siding, the smell of salt water and decay. The kind of place where bodies disappeared without questions. Beverly forced herself to walk slowly, trembling slightly, not hard to fake when genuine fear coursed through her veins. She wrapped her arms around herself, projecting vulnerability. The performance of her life. The east entrance stood open. Inside, darkness and the sound of water dripping somewhere in the depths. "Hello?" Her voice echoed, scared, small, inside. "Now." Beverly stepped through the threshold. The warehouse interior was vast. Rows of empty crates, exposed beams, concrete floors stained with years of industrial use. In the center, illuminated by dusty shafts of early light, stood three men. Two held Tommy between them. Her fellow lieutenant was beaten but alive, blood crusting one side of his face. The third man stepped forward. Mid-50s, expensive coat over tactical gear, the confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. Anthony Moretti, head of the family. "The famous Beverly Clark," he said, his voice carrying across the empty space. Brookover's little street rat turned spy. Beverly stopped 10 feet away, hands visible, posture submissive. "I'm here. Let Tommy go." Moretti smiled. "You really think it's that simple? You walk in, he walks out, everyone's happy?" "That was the deal." "The deal," Moretti said, circling her slowly, "was to prove that Alfredo Brookover values a homeless girl over his own organization. To show every family in Chicago that he's weak, sentimental." He stopped directly behind her. "So thank you for confirming that." Beverly's pulse hammered. "I came alone, like you asked." "Did you?" Moretti grabbed her arm, yanking her backward against him. His other hand produced a pistol, pressing it against her temple. "Or is Brookover watching right now, trying to decide if you are worth starting a war over?" The warehouse seemed to hold its breath. Then Alfredo's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Let her go, Anthony." He emerged from behind a row of crates, weapon drawn, moving with lethal grace. His suit was immaculate. His expression was death itself. "There he is," Moretti said, tightening his grip on Beverly. "Right on schedule. Predictable when it comes to her. Last warning." "Or what? You shoot, I shoot her. Your men shoot, mine shoot your lieutenant. Stalemate, Brookover." Alfredo's eyes met Beverly's across the distance. She saw calculation, strategy, and something else. Absolute certainty. "Now," he said quietly. The world exploded into motion. Glass shattered as sniper rounds found their targets. The two men holding Tommy dropped simultaneously, perfect headshots. Alfredo's strike team poured through side entrances, weapons trained. Moretti's gun swung toward Beverly's head. Alfredo fired. The shot took Moretti in the shoulder. Precise, disabling, not fatal. The rival boss's weapon clattered to the concrete as he stumbled backward. Beverly ran, not away, toward Alfredo, whose arms caught her as his men swarmed Moretti and secured the perimeter. Tommy was already being evacuated by Nate's team. "Are you hurt?" Alfredo's hands moved over her face, her arms, checking for injuries with frantic precision. "Only alive," Beverly managed, trembling against him. For the first time since she'd known him, Alfredo Brookover dropped every pretense. His arms wrapped around her, not possessive, not strategic, but desperate, human. He pulled her close, one hand cradling the back of her head, his face buried against her hair. "Never again," he whispered roughly. "Do you hear me? Never again." Beverly's hands clutched his jacket, grounding herself in his solidity. The warehouse reeked of gunpowder and blood, but in his arms she felt safer than she had in years. Around them, his men secured the scene with professional efficiency. Moretti was zip-tied and being dragged toward a vehicle. Tommy was already innerbound en route to medical care. But Alfredo didn't move, didn't let go. "I thought," his voice cracked, "when he put that gun to your head." "I know," Beverly said, "I know." They stood like that for a long moment, two people who'd survived by never showing weakness, allowing themselves this one fragile truth. When Alfredo finally pulled back, his eyes were raw. "You're done with field work. No more assignments. No more risks." Beverly almost laughed. "You can't protect me from everything." "Watch me." His intensity should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like the only honest thing in a world built on deception. "We should go," Nate called from across the warehouse. "Police response time is 8 minutes." Alfredo nodded, but his hand found Beverly's. fingers interlacing with hers as they walked toward the exit. Whatever lines they'd been pretending not to cross, they just obliterated them all, and neither of them cared anymore. The confrontation happened 3 days later. Beverly had spent those days in a different safe house, larger, more secure, with Alfredo's personal security rotating shifts outside her door. Tommy was recovering in a private medical facility. The Moretti family was in disarray, their leadership in custody, their operations dismantled. But one piece of unfinished business remained. Luca Ferran. Alfredo had been methodical in his investigation. Phone records, bank transfers, testimony from sources within the organization. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. His most trusted advisor had betrayed him, leaking Beverly's identity to the Morettis in a misguided attempt to protect the family. Now Beverly sat in the back of Alfredo's SUV as they drove to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Not abandoned like the exchange location, but very much operational. A Brookover Holdings facility where problems were handled quietly. "You don't have to be here for this," Alfredo said, his voice carefully neutral. Beverly looked at him. He'd barely slept in 3 days, the exhaustion showing in the tension around his eyes. "Yes, I do." "Beverly, he put a target on me. I deserve to see this through." Alfredo studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Inside the warehouse, Luca waited in a chair under harsh fluorescent lights. His hands were zip-tied. 2 guards flanked him. When he saw Alfredo enter with Beverly, something flickered across his face. Regret, maybe, or resignation. "Alfredo," Luca said quietly, "I can explain. You leaked her identity to the Morettis." Alfredo's voice was flat, cold. "You endangered her life and compromised this organization's security. What explanation makes that acceptable?" Luca's jaw tightened. "I was trying to protect you. Protect what we built. She was making you weak." "Weak?" Alfredo's laugh was bitter. "I executed a perfect counter-operation that destroyed our biggest rival's infrastructure in 72 hours. Does that seem weak to you? You risked everything for her." Luca's composure cracked. "You sent teams, resources, exposed our tactical capabilities, all to save one girl. The Alfredo I knew would never." "The Alfredo you knew," Alfredo interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "died the moment my own consigliere sold out an innocent woman to murderers." He stepped closer. "You didn't betray Beverly, Luca. You betrayed me." Silence filled the warehouse. Beverly watched the exchange, her heart pounding. This was the man who'd orchestrated her exposure, who'd put her in Moretti's crosshairs, who'd nearly gotten her killed. She should feel satisfaction, vindication. Instead, she felt something more complicated. "I've known you for 20 years, Alfredo continued, and for the first time, Beverly heard something beneath the anger. Pain. "You were at my father's funeral. You helped me consolidate power when half the family wanted me dead. You were the one person I trusted without question." Luca's eyes glistened. "Then listen to me now. She's changing you, making you vulnerable. Love is a weapon in this world, Alfredo. Our enemies will use it to destroy you." "They already tried," Beverly said quietly. Both men looked at her. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "You leaked my identity thinking it would expose Alfredo's weakness. Instead, it proved his strength. He didn't choose between me and his organization. He protected both. Perfectly." "For now," Luca said bitterly, "but what about next time? What about when the choice isn't so clean?" "Then I'll make that choice when it comes," Alfredo said. He drew his weapon, the same pistol he'd used at the warehouse exchange. "But you won't be here to see it." Luca's face went pale. "Alfredo, please. You contacted our enemies. You compromised our security. You put a civilian target in play." Alfredo's hand was steady. "There's only one response to betrayal at your level. You know that. I was trying to save you from yourself. Then you failed." Time seemed to slow. Beverly watched Alfredo's finger move toward the trigger. Watched the resignation settle over Luca's features. Watched the end of a 20-year partnership play out under fluorescent lights. And she realized she couldn't let it happen, not like this. "Wait," she said. Alfredo's eyes cut to her, surprised. Beverly's pulse hammered as she moved forward, holding out her hand. Give it to me. Beverly, he betrayed me. Not just you, me too. Her voice was stronger now. If this is justice, then let me deliver it. Understanding dawned in Alfredo's expression. Not agreement, something deeper. Recognition that she was choosing this, claiming her place in his world not through protection, but through action. Are you sure? He asked quietly. No, she wasn't sure of anything anymore, but she nodded anyway. Alfredo placed the weapon in her hand. It was heavier than she'd expected, colder. Beverly approached Luca, the gun trembling in her grip. She'd never killed anyone, had never even fired a weapon before this moment. Luca looked up at her, and she saw genuine fear in his eyes. You were wrong about me, she said softly. I'm not his weakness, I'm his mirror. She raised the gun. Her hand shook violently. Every instinct screamed at her to stop, to hand the weapon back, to walk away from this final line. But she'd already crossed so many. The shot echoed through the warehouse. Luca slumped forward, the chair tipping sideways. Beverly stared at what she'd done, the gun falling from her nerveless fingers. Her whole body trembled. Nausea rose in her throat. Then Alfredo's arms were around her, turning her away from the body, pulling her against his chest. It's done, he murmured. It's over. But it wasn't over. It would never be over. She'd just killed a man in cold blood, executed someone tied to a chair. She'd become exactly what she'd feared. Now you understand my world, Alfredo whispered against her hair. Beverly pulled back, looking up at him with eyes that burned. No, she said, her voice raw. I understand ours. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, acceptance, surrender to a truth they could no longer deny. They'd both changed each other. Irreversibly, irrevocably. And there was no going back to who they'd been before. What would you do if the only way to survive meant becoming someone you didn't recognize? When the person you were doesn't match the person you need to be. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't choosing between right and wrong. It's realizing the choice was made for you long before you pulled the trigger. If this story is making you question where your own lines are, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. 6 weeks later, Chicago looked different from the 14th floor of Brookover Holdings. It was cleaner, more ordered, like a chessboard where Beverly could finally see all the pieces. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office, modest by executive standards, but light years from the bus terminal where her story began. A sleek computer setup dominated her desk, multiple monitors displaying data streams, surveillance feeds, intelligence reports from her network of street contacts. The homeless woman who'd returned a briefcase in the rain no longer existed. In her place stood something else entirely. Beverly Clark, officially listed as a risk assessment consultant for Brookover Holdings. Unofficially known in the Chicago's underworld as the Ghost, Alfredo Brookover's invisible advisor, the strategist no one saw but everyone feared. Her intelligence network had expanded exponentially. Street veterans still fed her information, but now she also had access to corporate espionage, financial tracking, digital surveillance. She'd become fluent in the language of power, reading patterns in money movements, predicting territorial disputes before they erupted, identifying threats weeks before they materialize. She'd learned to think like Alfredo, methodical, strategic, ruthless when necessary. And somewhere along the way, she'd stopped being terrified of what that meant. The office door opened without knocking, the only person who had that privilege. Alfredo entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He developed a habit of appearing in her office at odd hours, sometimes with business, sometimes just appearing. The Castellano situation, he asked, setting 1 cup on her desk. Resolved. They accepted our terms for the Northside distribution. Beverly pulled up a file on her screen. 3 of their captains were embezzling. I sent them the evidence anonymously. They'll be too busy with internal house cleaning to challenge our territory expansion. Alfredo's smile was genuine, proud. You're getting dangerously good at this. I learned from the best. He moved behind her chair, looking at the monitors displaying real-time data across the city. His hand rested on her shoulder, a casual intimacy they'd stopped questioning weeks ago. Sometimes I forget you've only been doing this for 3 months, he said quietly. Beverly leaned back slightly, letting herself accept his touch. Sometimes I forget I used to be someone else. The words hung between them, acknowledgement of everything they'd become. After Luca's death, something had shifted. The pretense had evaporated. Alfredo no longer kept her at arm's length. Beverly no longer questioned her place in his world. They'd stopped fighting what they were to each other. "Do you regret it?" Alfredo asked, his voice low. "Any of it?" Beverly considered the question seriously. Did she regret returning the briefcase? Walking into his building? Accepting his offer? Pulling that trigger? "No," she said finally and meant it. "I survived by being invisible for 2 years. Now I survive by being indispensable." She turned to face him. "I prefer this. Even knowing what it cost?" "Especially knowing what it cost." She stood, closing the distance between them. "You asked me once if I understood what it meant to be a liability you couldn't eliminate. I understand now. It means being the one person who sees all of you, the violence, the strategy, the empire, the loneliness, and doesn't run." Alfredo's hand rose to her face, thumb tracing her jawline with devastating gentleness. "You've become far more than a liability, Beverly Clark. So have you." His smile was rare, genuine, reserved only for moments like this, when the city slept and they could pretend they were just two people instead of a mafia boss and his most dangerous weapon. "There are rumors," he said, "about us, about my ghost advisor. Let them talk. Mystery is useful. Some are saying you run the organization now, that I'm just the face." Beverly laughed softly. "You and I both know that's not true. We're partners, different strengths, same goals." "Partners," Alfredo repeated, testing the word. Then he pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I like that better than what we were pretending before." "What were we pretending?" "That this was temporary, that you'd eventually walk away, that I'd let you." Beverly's hands rested against his chest, feeling his heartbeat through expensive fabric. "Where would I go? Everything I am now, you helped create, for better or worse." "For better," he said firmly. "Don't doubt that." They stayed like that for a moment. Two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and somehow built something unbreakable from the wreckage. A chime from Beverly's computer broke the moment. She glanced at the screen, a late-night alert from one of her contacts. "The Moretti remnants are meeting with the South Side crew," she said, already analyzing patterns. "Could be reorganization, could be retaliation planning." Alfredo's expression shifted back to business. "Recommendations?" "Surveillance first. If they're just consolidating, we let them. If they're planning something against us," she met his eyes, "we eliminate the threat before it materializes." "Agreed. Brief Nate in the morning." Beverly nodded, turning back to her screens. Alfredo moved toward the door, then paused. "Beverly?" She looked up. "Thank you," he said simply. "For finding me that night, for refusing to run, for becoming this." Her smile was soft, genuine. "Thank you for asking how I knew where to find you. That question changed everything." After he left, Beverly returned to her monitors, coordinating intelligence, tracking threats, protecting the empire they'd built together. The city whispered about Alfredo Brookover's ghost, the mysterious woman who'd appeared from nowhere and transformed his organization's effectiveness overnight. None of them knew the truth. She wasn't a ghost. She was fully, completely alive for the first time in years. She'd walked into darkness expecting destruction. Instead, she'd found purpose, power, partnership, and love. Dangerous, complicated, absolutely unbreakable love with the one person who understood that survival sometimes meant embracing the shadows instead of running from them. Beverly Clark had returned a mafia boss's briefcase and asked nothing in return. He'd given her everything anyway. And together they ruled the darkness with a connection that was equal parts strategy and soul, their greatest strength and their most devastating vulnerability. But in a world built on calculated risks, they'd both decided some gambles were worth taking. Even if the stakes were everything they'd become. Even if losing meant losing themselves. Because sometimes the most dangerous love is the one that sees you completely, every scar, every sin, every shadow, and chooses you anyway. Beverly's story began with a single choice: to do the right thing in a world where right and wrong had long since blurred into shades of gray. She walked into Alfredo Brookover's world with nothing but honesty and courage. She emerged as his equal, his partner, his most dangerous weapon. Some would call that a fall from grace. She calls it survival. What would you have done? If you found something that didn't belong to you, would you have the courage to return it, even knowing it might change your life forever? Would you walk into danger for the chance at something real? And if survival meant becoming someone you never imagined you could be, would you embrace the transformation or run from it? If Beverly and Alfredo's story made you think about the choices we make when we have nothing left to lose, share it. Send it to someone who needs to remember that sometimes our darkest moments lead to our greatest transformations. Because the most powerful stories aren't the ones with easy answers. They're the ones that make us question where our own lines are drawn. Want to know what happens next? The Ghost and the Mafia boss have secured their empire. But in a world built on shifting loyalties and calculated betrayals, peace is always temporary. New threats are emerging. Old enemies are regrouping. And Beverly Clark is about to discover that being indispensable comes with a price she never anticipated. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of their story. Hit that follow button. Turn on notifications. Because some stories don't end, they evolve. Drop a comment below. Would you have returned the briefcase? At what point did Beverly cross the line you wouldn't cross? And most importantly, do you think love can survive in a world where trust is the rarest currency of all? This isn't just Beverly's story. It's a question we all face eventually. When survival demands transformation, who do you choose to become? Thank you for walking through the darkness with us. The shadows are just beginning to reveal their secrets.